This morning I am finishing up a three-part series on the bride of Christ. And the theme, and all right, Debbie, can you put the slide up there? And I am working on my technology, the clicker thing. Okay, yes, so we go. All right, so we've been talking about how, what is the purpose of life? You know, just like a light question like that. And the thing I'm putting forth is that the purpose of our life is that we are engaged to be married to Jesus, and that in this life we're his betrothed, and all this is leading up to our wedding day. And all right, so let's see if this clicker thing, turn it on. Okay, very good suggestion. All right, there we go. So we've looked at this verse previously, and the context of this verse is that there's been this big war between the harlot and the groom, and Jesus wins, and there's this big hallelujah, and because now it says, "Let us rejoice and be glad, for the marriage of the Lamb has come," and then there's these 6 words: "His bride has made herself ready." His bride has made herself ready. And my understanding of our main purpose for the rest of our lives is that there is this wedding ceremony, this wedding celebration that's coming, and that our job as the bride of Christ is to get ready for that. And it's been given to her to clothe ourselves with fine linen, which is this allusion to glory, bright and clean, for the fine linen is the righteous acts of the saints. So it's true that we have been made righteous, and we are becoming righteous. All right. Okay. So in Ephesians 5, Paul talks about this mystery of how marriage is a picture of Christ in the church. And kind of here's the essence of what he's saying. He's talking about Christ, that he might present to himself the church in all of her glory. And it's like when there's a wedding, kind of the high point of the wedding is the bride comes down the aisle and is presented, and the groom looks at the bride, and the Father presents the bride in all of her glory. It's like this is the pinnacle of this ceremony. And the bride, of course, is dressed in white. And the significance is that she would be holy and blameless. So my conclusion is that the most important way that I can, let me just tell you, I shared for the last couple weeks that part of my journey personally is I am learning to attach to God and to other people. That in my development, that's just kind of this little important thing that I missed out on, is I didn't really learn how to attach to my parents, and I exchanged a securely attached relationship for trying to earn my value by performing, and that doesn't work very well for relationships. So I'm on this whole journey of learning how to attach to God. And my conclusion is, for my own journey, the best way for me to do that is to learn how to attach to God by me seeing who God says I am, and that is his betrothed. And if I can study that, think about it, meditate on it, dream about who God says I am, then I will be transformed. And as I'm transformed and show that kind of love to other people, especially my wife, that is the single most important thing for me to do. Okay, so just a quick review of the first week. Paul said that there is this mystery, this great mystery, and that is that marriage is this picture of Christ in the church. And that is ultimately what we are. We are the bride of Christ. And we also looked at this verse in Genesis 2, so going back to the very beginning, like what is God doing in even creating this? That he said about Adam, it's not good for you to be alone. I'm going to make a helper suitable for you. And if marriage is a picture of Christ in the church, then it stands to reason that there's a picture of something going on in heaven, that it wasn't good for Christ to be alone. Okay, so we looked at this little graphic. So here's the Trinity, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, and they have lived together for eternity past. And each of them is honoring and loving and supporting each other. And for all eternity past, they were all sufficient. Life was good and full and rich. And then, in some mysterious way, they made this conclusion. We're missing something. And the Father said to the Son, it's not good that you're alone. And I'm going to make a helper suitable for you. And that word suitable means that someone corresponds to you. It's like somebody is standing in front of you that's just right for you, that is compatible, that's sort of your equal. I mean, this is part of the mystery. It's like, well, now wait a minute. We are not equal to Christ because he's God and we're created. But there's this mystery that something amazing's happened. So in this next graphic, it's like, okay, there's Jesus, but he's got this bride. So it's like, it's the Trinity plus one, and we're that one. So I'm not saying we become God or we're members of the Trinity, but now we're the Father's daughter-in-law. I mean, this is amazing. So then last week, I talked about 5 levels of intimacy in our relationship with God. So we start off as an outsider before we become a believer. The next level is servant. And a servant is primarily serves at the pleasure of the master to get stuff done. It's primarily transactional. So when we become Christians, we're part of God's household, and our role is a servant. But God doesn't want to stop there. He says, hey, I've no longer called you slaves, I've called you a friend, is what Jesus said. And a friend is somebody who, gets the inside scoop on what's happening. And the next level up in intimacy is that we're a child. We're a son or a daughter. Now, one thing when you're a child is you get an inheritance. A friend doesn't get that. But if you have very wealthy parents and you get an inheritance, this is a good thing. And but more than just an inheritance, from a relational standpoint, you have access to your parents all the time. And friends can come and go. Our children are like with us forever. But the most intimate of all relationships is a spouse. If we're a spouse, you don't just going to get the money, you actually have the inheritance already. You've already have it so I guess if you're a fiance, you're going to get it pretty soon, right? As soon as you get married. And there's a level of intimacy that is between a husband and wife that's just as far as we can understand it, it's the closest level of intimacy that there is. And so I believe that God invites us to say, okay, you may start out as a servant, but as we grow and mature, can you grow in your level of relationship and intimacy to really walk in primarily who I am is the fiancé of Christ? And I'm getting ready for that. Okay, so let's look at, when I share, almost always I go back to this verse about the first and second greatest commandment. And why? Because Stephen Covey says the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. All right, so let's okay, if this is the most important thing, let's keep that in the forefront of our minds. So let's look at this commandment through the eyes of being the bride of Christ. Why would God say the most important thing of all in our whole lives is to love God? Well, what if it's because our main role as Christ's fiancé is to fall deeper and deeper in love with Him throughout our whole life? What if the most important thing that we can do in this life is to prepare, for the bride has made herself ready? What if what God cared about more than what we do for Him is that we fall in love with Him? And that's why He said, this is the greatest commandment. Okay, the second greatest commandment is that we love other people. How does looking at that through this lens of us being the bride of Christ, how does that fit together? So, loving people, in case you didn't know it, is really hard. It's just not so easy. And oftentimes, I am confronted with, you know what, I am not doing a very good job of loving somebody. And the more that I understand how God loves me, the more grace I will have to then turn around and extend that love to other people. And so when I'm challenged to love people, it's an opportunity for me to press into God and say, Lord, how do you love? Because I need to know that in order to love other people well. And then the interesting thing is I come to know His love better because I need to know that in order to love better. So it actually takes me back to the first commandment of falling deeper in love with Him as I see that. Okay, we looked at this also before, is that God's whole purpose from the very beginning is, from the foundation of the earth, has been so that He could create a bride. But to be the bride, He had to give us free will, otherwise it wouldn't be meaningful. But also, in order for us to be a suitable helper and a suitable companion, He needs to elevate us to this position of glory. So going back to Ephesians 1, it says, yes, he chose us from the beginning. Why? That we would be holy and blameless before him. This is the whole thing of the bride has made herself ready and dressed in white. And the white garments are the righteous deeds of the saints. So this is our whole process between now and when we are part of the wedding celebration is growing in being holy and blameless. And Paul says the same thing in Ephesians 5, that he might present us in all of her glory, that she would be holy and blameless. And so that whole thing of glory is not a guilt thing, like, oh, I feel guilty, or like I should stop sinning, or like I really want to sin, but I know I shouldn't. If we see that our destiny is that we are going to be the bride of Christ, then I feel like that is just this whole much superior method for cooperating in allowing the Lord to work in our lives. Okay, so let's talk some more about this whole thing of getting ready. So the first part of Revelation, John records this letter to 7 churches, and one of them's to the church of Laodicea. And so in Revelation 3, starts off with, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into him and dine with him, and he with me. He who overcomes, I will grant to him to sit with me on my throne, as I overcame and sat down with my Father at his throne. He who has an ear to hear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. So when I was a young Christian in college and learned how to share the gospel with people, I memorized this verse, and I would say, listen, it's like God is not going to force his way into your life. He's going to stand at the door and knock, and then you've got this opportunity to either say, yes, I'll let you in, or not. And but what I've learned is a lot more about the historical context of this verse and how it relates to a bride and a bridegroom and the betrothal process. So in the Hebrew culture when this is written, parents were way more involved in marriages than they are now. And so it wasn't just a unilateral thing of okay, I'm just going to get married and let my parents know. They were a lot more involved in the process. So let's say you're in a village and young boy kind of likes some young girl, and they start talking to each other and go, well, I'm sweet, it'd be awesome if we could get together. But you did that in conjunction with your parents. And so let's just say that, boy and girl, Mary and Joseph or whomever it was, says, let's get serious about this. And I'm going to read from this book called Lost in Translation, Rediscovering the Hebrew Roots of Our Faith. Kent Larson was reading it when he was staying with us at Tribal and was telling me about this. So I'm going to read you a little bit about the Hebrew context for this verse. So, if all signals were go between the young man and the young lady, the prospective groom and his father would let it leak out to the bride's family that a formal proposal would soon be made. On the day the prospective bridegroom made his first official move, he brought his father to the intended bride's house. They carried three things: a betrothal cup, wine, and the money. When they got there, they knocked. The prospective bride's father would be on the other side of the door. I mean, like, he knows what's happening. I mean, he's been tipped off, looks out the window. There's this young man and his father carrying the cup. And but before he opened it, he looked to his daughter to confirm what in most cases she had long settled in her own mind. Should he open the door? If she said yes, for all practical purposes, the commitment to work through the betrothal process and arrive at a fully functioning marriage was going to happen. Therefore, hers was not a lightly made decision, for the decision was not, can we have a wedding? Once the door was opened, the only remaining question was, will we have a marriage that we can work out the terms? In other words, opening the door was the first major step towards making a marriage, which is precisely what Yeshua was saying in Revelation 3:20. You open the door, and the process begins. So that's a little historical context for what Jesus meant in that verse. Now, he's also saying that I'll come in and dine with him. So what's all that about, and what's the thing with the cup? So in this betrothal process, there were 4 cups of wine that were had, which paralleled in a Seder meal, there's 4 cups of wine. And so the first cup was like, okay, they let him in the door, sit down, let's have a glass of wine together. And then they have a meal, and they start talking about, they start negotiating. And Bob goes, yep, and the second cup of wine's during the meal. And if they successfully worked out the terms, they'd have a third cup of wine to celebrate. All right, it's official, they're betrothed. The 4th cup is at the wedding. Okay, the 4th cup seals the deal. Now, do you remember that at the Last Supper, Jesus had the 3rd cup, which is the cup of redemption, but he says, I am not going to have wine again until I'm in my Father's kingdom. When is that? That is the wedding feast. That is when he's going to have the next cup of wine. So isn't it, when you start studying the scriptures and you see all of this stuff that relates to the wedding. Okay, so then now the betrophal's finalized. It's all agreed between the 2 families. And so the young groom-to-be has an important thing that he needs to do, and that is go build a house for his bride and their new family. And he would usually do that at his father's property, sometimes attached, but his responsibility is, listen, before we get married, I'm responsible for providing a place for us to live. So, that might shine some insight on this verse from John 14. So Jesus said, in my Father's house are many dwelling places. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go to prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also. So do you see how that verse relates to this whole betrothal process that happened in their culture? And that's where Jesus is right now. And he's going to come back again and receive us to himself. I mean, that's just amazing of this whole thing that is going to happen. Okay, So the next verse, if I can get it to work. Okay. So the verse that we're going to look at here today, I would say, is the key verse for that I invite us to remember. So we looked at this last week about sonship. See how great a love the Father has bestowed on us, that we would become children of God, and such we are. Beloved, now we are children of God, and it has not appeared yet as what we will be. But we know that when he appears, we will be like him, because we will see him as he is, and everyone who has this hope fixed on him purifies himself as he is pure. Okay, so imagine that we are standing face to face with Jesus, and his glory, he is filled with glory. His glory is radiating, and we are standing there as his fiancée in his presence. And when we're in the presence of somebody who's confident in themselves and who they are, the culture that they emit and the influence that they are, I mean, we become like them. And so when we are in the presence of Jesus, we are like him. That's what this verse says, and it's absolutely true, is that there is this transformation that happens to us when we are fully in his presence. All right. It says we'll be like him because we see him as he is. And I believe that when we're his bride, this whole thing about being glorious will just happen because he is glorious. I mean, it's just this natural thing that'll happen. Okay, but we're not fully with him yet. We're in this stage where we're his betrothed, but we're not fully in his presence. In 1 Corinthians 13, Paul says, "For now we look in a mirror dimly, but then we'll be face to face." So how about now? What do we do now? Here's what John says. Everyone who has this hope fixed on him purifies himself as he is pure. What if the best application of having this hope fixed on him is if we would imagine ourselves on that wedding day, that we're looking forward to the wedding, and we picture ourselves as Jesus the groom, we're the bride, we're there on the altar, and we're fully in his presence. You know, for those of us who are married, we probably spent a lot of time thinking about and planning for our wedding day and going, man, this is what I'm looking forward to. This process of finally getting married, just being, when you're betrothed, you spend some time with them, but when you're married, you live with them. You know, and that's the hope. So what if we imagined ourselves fully being in the presence of Christ, fully secure in his love, taking all of that in, and that is what we thought about and put our hope in? Do you think that if we did that, it would influence us to be pure? Because that's our destiny. That's where we're going to be. So, here's what my thought is. What we stare at, what we focus on, what we think about, this is what we become. When we're with the Lord, we will become like him. When we are totally in his presence and his glory is radiating from him, when there's no darkness but only his resplendent beauty and majesty, then his culture will permeate every fiber of our being. So let's think about this in terms of temptation. Because we are all tempted to do things that we shouldn't do. So let's say that we are feeling empty inside, we're depressed, we're discouraged. Like we're aware, like, there's something empty in me, and then we're tempted, like, oh, you could self-medicate. You know, there's pornography available on the internet, or there's chocolate, or I'll have a pint of ice cream, or I'll indulge in some retail therapy, or whatever. You know, there's all kinds of temptations that we have when we feel empty inside. And so we are absolutely going to be faced with temptation. So what's the best way to fight that? Now, one way to fight it is willpower. And I'm telling you, willpower is really shallow. It is no match for these tremendous temptations that come. But our superpower is our identity. So if I am feeling this emptiness and I'm tempted to go try and fill it with something else, and I go, who am I? Oh, I am Christ's fiancé. And someday I'm going to be married to him, and I'm going to be in glory, and it's going to be amazing. And part of what I'm supposed to do in this life is to get ready for that. Then kind of thinking about doing something, succumbing to some temptation, that's not who I am. That's not the real me. The real me is this person that's going to be Christ's betrothed. And I think that is a far better way of battling temptation, is just to remember who we are. I love this verse in 2 Corinthians that says, but we who with unveiled faces, beholding as in a mirror the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from glory to glory. So if we can fix our eyes on Christ and his glory and behold him and think about him, what this verse says is, what just the natural thing that'll happen is that we'll be transformed into his image. Okay, so let's go back and look at the second part of this verse in Revelation 3. So there's two parts of this passage. The first part is, who are we? Oh, he's saying, you are my bride. You're my fiancé. That's who you really are. And so will you say yes to my proposal? Will you say yes to my invitation? The second thing is, what do we do? And this is where he talks about overcoming. To him who overcomes, I will grant to him to sit down with me on my throne. All right, so we're going to be the queen. In the ruling and reigning over the universe, Jesus is the king, and he's going to reign, and we are going to be the queen. And we're together going to rule the universe. Now, Christ actually had this process that he went through that qualified him to do that. Because he said, I overcame, and I sat down with my Father at his throne. And so now he's saying, okay, now you're going to be my bride, and there is this important qualification and training for reigning that you need to do. And that's an overcoming. And so that is this key part in, remember the theme is the bride has made herself ready. So how do we make ourselves ready? All right, so here is another verse in Revelation. He who overcomes will inherit these things. All right, so it's just this overcoming is tied to our inheritance. Let's go all the way back to Genesis 1 at the very beginning. Two things he said. I've created you in my image. That's who you are. And then what do? It's like, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, and rule it. So the Hebrew word for subdue means to subject and subjugate, to forcefully take something that does not want to be subjected and bring it under your control. And then rule over what I've given you. So Christ is ruler of the universe. We've been created in his image. So what do? We're to rule. And we learn to do that by overcoming, by doing hard things, by things that are not easy. So how do we do that? So a couple more verses. One from 2 Corinthians 4, for momentary light affliction is producing in us an eternal weight of glory far beyond all comparison. Okay, so there's that word glory again. Why does that keep coming up? Why is that this reoccurring theme about glory? So the good news is when something's happened to us, it has the effect of producing an eternal weight of glory that's far beyond comparison. I mean, like, wow, that's really good. I want that. Unfortunately, that has a price, and that's called momentary light affliction. Now, it doesn't seem momentary and light when you're in it, right? It's not light, what you're going through, Eva. Doesn't seem light. But in light of eternity, God is saying, but I am using this suffering to produce an eternal weight of glory. Another verse that we looked at last time is that if you're a son, there's this whole thing about receiving a spirit of adoption, crying out, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself testifies with our spirit that we are children of God, and if children, heirs. This inheritance thing again. Heirs with God and fellow heirs with Christ, if indeed we suffer with him, so that we can be glorified with him. So, do you see how glory and suffering, it's like we all want glory, right? What's the price for glory? Suffering. And human nature is, when we're going through a hard thing, we say to ourselves, man, as soon as this thing stops, it'll be so good. I am just waiting for this difficult thing to stop. That's understandable. That's human nature. But here's what God says about it. Suffering results in glory. So can we actually embrace difficulty? Because this is the very essence of the bride making herself ready. It's not a feel-good message, is it? But I mean, this is what God has to say. So, Bob, could you help me and pass out? I've got a handout. I've got way more copies than I need for everybody, but so before we break up and do exercise, I have a homework assignment that I would like to invite you to do on your own time. And that's in this handout. The homework assignment is in that bottom box. And here's what that says. Imagine that you are now married to Jesus, or you're at the marriage ceremony. You are standing in front of him, and his glory is radiating from him, permeating every fiber of your body, filling you to overflowing. Take this in and journal about how this impacts you. So I want to share with you, so I've been doing this for the last couple days, and so this morning I said, okay, I'm going to do this exercise myself, and I just want to read to you what I wrote down in my journal. Lord, help me imagine our wedding day. We are your glorious bride, standing across from you, holding hands, with the beaming Father looking on, and the Holy Spirit as both your best man and our maid of honor. I don't know. That's just what came to me. All of creation and the angels are excitingly present for the fulfillment of their longing. As we look at your face, we see your sheer delight. This day is the fulfillment of your eternal plan. This is the fulfillment of your longing from eternity past. It was not good that you were alone, and after millennia of preparation, this glorious day has now arrived. This day you have long awaited and looked forward to. This is the consummation, the fulfillment and realization of your eternal plan. This is why you have such great joy. I'm having difficulty taking in your great love for me. I'm astonished, amazed, and blown away. I am humbled that you, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, would treasure and prize me like this. There's nothing that I have done to deserve it. It's totally grace and mercy and lavish and a superabundant gift. Who am I that the King of the universe would have such delight in me? All that being said, I receive the gift you have so graciously given me. If you say that you value and delight in me as you do, then my only response is to receive it. And I felt like Jesus said, thank you for receiving my love. This pleases me. As I lift my eyes to behold your face, your favor and delight flood my soul. I take in your high regard for me, and I am filled with your glory. I am completely satisfied and filled. You are the fulfillment of every longing I've ever had. In your presence is fullness of joy. So that was my encounter with the Lord, doing this exercise of me just kind of going in my imagination of what it's like at that wedding day. By the way, if you notice, I struggle with feeling worthy of being his bride. I mean, it's like, obviously, he thinks way higher of me than I think of myself. I mean, I just have a hard time, like, can this really be true? That you would think so highly of me? Because it's like, I don't feel worthy. But if I say I'm not worthy and he says I am, I hurt his feelings. Because he's saying, this is how I feel about you. And I have to humble myself and just say, I receive it whether I feel that I'm worthy or not. So my conclusion, this verse in 1 John 3 about whoever has this hope fixed on him purifies himself as he is pure. To me, doing this exercise is the most practical thing that I can come up with. And wouldn't that be amazing if God would so work in my heart that every day, all day, I would have this thought about I am his betrothed. And every day I live, I'm a day closer to our wedding day. And I'm looking forward to that. And that's what I'm all about. So I think that this whole thing has changed my life and has the potential to change it more than anything. So I appreciate being able to share. And of course, whoever shares the message learns the most. So I'm appreciative of being able to do this. Okay, so got some discussion questions. First one, hey, in a practical way, how do we put our hope in Jesus? So that would be a great thing to talk about. The other three are stories. Stories are awesome. Stories is, if we share stories with each other, we learn a lot. So, what's a story that when you were tempted to do something that wasn't your best self, that you remembered, oh, this is what God says about me, and then that helped you act like the person that God made you to be? And not if, but when we don't act our best selves and give into a temptation, we can claim a mulligan and say, okay, we can replay it in our own mind. It's like, okay, if I did remember who God says I was, how would I have acted differently? And we can learn a lot from that as well. Questions 3 and 4. Tell a story about how you overcame something difficult. And how might that have helped you in your whole process of training for reigning? And the last one, tell a story about how affliction produced glory in your life. So you don't have to participate if you don't want to, but I invite you to. And so if we can get together in groups of 4 or 5 people or so and chat and talk about this, it's, you can just do it as long as you want. Be done by 11:30 if you have kids, so that you can, they can come back. But anyway, hope you enjoy the discussion, and let's break up for that now.